You got sword in my shield. You got shield in my sword. It's Fragments of Silicon.
Welcome to that rare beast, the Fragments of Silicon Thursday interview. It doesn't happen often, and thank God for that, but it does happen sometimes. And joining us today is Craig Edwards of Brainbox.CC.
Right.
Yeah. Right, so let's get into it. We like to start by asking our guests how they got interested in video games, both on a personal and professional level.
Well, I've been into video games since I was very young. I think it started when my dad brought home a Sinclair Spectrum, and at that age I wasn't old enough to be allowed to program on it and play with it. But I remember him spending hours making the cursor move around, drawing all kinds of weird shapes on the screen with the cursor. And as soon as I had the chance when I was a bit older, I purchased I don't know if you've heard of them outside of the UK, but there is a computer called the BBC Master 128, a BBC Micro. It's kind of like the Apple II. Every school had one. And as soon as I had the money from pocket money, I went and bought one and learned to program on there. And the first thing I wrote basically was a game. And it kind of went from there. Basically, the thing I've enjoyed making the most has always been games.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard of the BBC Micro, but that's not even among British computer systems, that's not one that gets discussed often because, well, it was primarily used for education.
Correct, yeah.
I mean, but there were games on it from what I recall.
Yeah, there was lots of them. There was, I think one of the most popular ones, something called Repton. I can't remember what the equivalent version of it was. It was based on something else. You basically had to move rocks around to collect diamonds, but if there was nothing underneath the rocks, they would fall and block your path, and you had to restart.
Boulder Dash.
Yes, exactly like Boulder Dash, yeah.
And anyway, so when did the shift to making video games happen?
Practically straight away. As soon as I got the computer, I was making games. The first thing I did, I wanted to make a game. So I started off with a text adventure. So basically just printing things out onto the screen in text, and you would type in what you wanted to do, and it would guess what you meant, and then go to another room, like go north, go south, pick up objects, things like that. It had limited appeal, though. There wasn't that many people wanted to play that kind of thing. So I had to move on to learning how to do graphics, sound, and all the other things that went along with it. That took a little while, so I was quite young. And it basically escalated from there.
And as far as I can see, your company, Brainbox, was founded in the early 90s.
Kind of. It wasn't technically a company as such, so much as me and a friend who were making games. And back then it was, we called it, we started off, oddly enough, making, are you aware of the Choose Your Own Adventure books?
Yes. Yes.
Steve Jackson and Livingston fighting fantasy books.
Yes, actually.
So I started off making those kind of things before I got into computers. And me and a friend used to use our whole break times up and our whole lunch times at school, rather geekily writing these books. So we started off, we called it Crypt Game Books, I believe, or something like that. And then when I moved into making video games, I called it Crypt Software. And then a few years back, I renamed it to Brainbox.CC, but it's basically essentially the same thing going through the years. Only recently have I ever started doing anything with it that's with the intention of bringing games to a larger market that people can actually play them, get them on Steam or places like that.
Right. So, if I'm understanding this correctly, while you've been making video games for literally decades now, it's only very recently that you've joined what would be called the professional ranks, I suppose.
That's right. Yes.
And well, I suppose what were you working on back in the day?
All kinds of things. One of my earliest games was something called Tile World. And unfortunately, I've lost that one now. It was on 5 1/4-inch discs, if you remember those. And the copies that I had have long since practically turned to dust, and they can't be read anymore. And the idea of the game was that it was a bit like Bomberman, in that you had a guy that could run around a top-down level and place bombs. The bombs would tick down, but then when the bombs detonated, they would recursively, they would move along a pattern based on the colour of the blocks below. So instead of just going out in an X shape like on Bomberman, they would chase along a pattern based on the level design. So you had various monsters walking around, and different monsters could only step on different colours. That would be something that I would like to possibly remake at some point in the future if I had the time.
And what else?
There was also a game called Dragonfly, which I wrote on PC, actually. That was a bit later. It's basically a clone of R-Type. Have you ever played R-Type?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's basically a clone of R-Type. And I had finished that one, but at the time, DOS was kind of on its way out, and I was still making DOS games, so it didn't really have the appeal to people. And the only way I could give it to people was on a floppy disk because I didn't have internet. So I was kind of limited in what I could do with the games I'd created back then. There's lots of different things like that I made. There was another one that I made on BBC and then attempted to rewrite it on PC, which was Galactic War, which is... Have you ever played Stars?
Stars. Like... and that's not... that's not bringing anything to mind offhand.
It's like, basically, well, I would say it's a turn-based space strategy game, but it didn't actually start as that. My friend came to me, and this is way before StarCraft existed, and he said, I want you to make me a game. And he wasn't clear on what he actually wanted. And his description of what he wanted, he got me to make the interface first, like the UI. And looking back, the interface he had me create was basically identical to the UI for Warcraft, the original RTS Warcraft. So I made this UI and then started making this game best I interpreted for what he wanted. And I thought he wanted a turn-based strategy because he was really into this turn-based space game called Stars, which is like a Windows game from the mid-90s. But that isn't actually what he wanted. What he's actually asking for was basically StarCraft, years before StarCraft existed. And it's kind of a shame that I didn't figure out what he wanted, because that could have been quite good. But I kind of missed the boat on that one, unfortunately.
Indeed. And apparently you also made a game called Kill the Teletubbies?
That's right, yes, that was at college. There's a funny story behind that one. Are you aware of what Teletubbies is?
Yeah. We did get Teletubbies over here. I mean, I never watched it because, well, it was the late 90s, and
it's for babies, isn't it? Yeah. It's a kids show. Yes. And we didn't like the show. We thought it was silly, and we thought we'd parody it by making this game. So the idea of the game was something pretty much like a rail shooter, like Operation Wolf, but you were stuck in the same location. The Teletubbies would pop up, and then you would just shoot them by putting a cursor over them, clicking the mouse, and turning them into a blood splatter. At the end, the boss guy would come along, and you would basically just shoot him until he was dead. It was quite a simple game. But oddly enough, it became quite popular at college. I gave it to people on floppy disks as a free game, and they gave it to other people on floppy disks. And it got to the point where the whole library was full of people playing this game, and they didn't like the image that portrayed for the school, so they outright banned the game and threatened sanctions for anybody they saw playing this game. Said you're not to play it anymore. That didn't really stop us, though. We put out a few more games after that one, chat programs and things like this, whatever we could, because we didn't like being told not to make games, basically.
That's not a surprise, and that reminds me of the days of Barney Stein 3D.
Yes.
But anyway, so let's see. Else here listed is the 7 Spells of Destruction.
Ah, yes. That one actually started off as one of those choose your own adventure books. When I was about 12, I wrote a choose your own adventure book and finished the book off. And that's one of my earliest attempts to make a game. Was from that. That was the text-based adventure game that I originally wrote. But like I said, it didn't have much demand. When I eventually discovered the internet and got onto the internet, I thought this could be done as a web-based game. So I produced a web-based version of it, which you can still play and still get to at ssod.org. If you go onto there, you can register, you can play it, and it probably keep you busy for a few hours. It can be frustratingly hard, though. And then a few years later, I discovered Unreal Engine. And it was the first game I tried to make in Unreal Engine. I did make some progress on that, but it's probably going to be something where it's a bit outside my abilities because of the amount of art assets that are needed beyond my budget and beyond my skill to do. So that one's kind of on the back burner. So perhaps maybe in the future, if somehow I become a massive success, that might be revisited.
Always the dream.
Hopefully. Can only hope.
Yeah. Anyway, how did your testing in Unreal Engine go? Like, did you manage to get a hang of the engine?
Yeah, it took quite some time to get used to some of the quirks of it. Until that point, I've never really dealt with any kind of engines. The only thing I'd really dealt with as a middleware kind of thing would be XNA. Is that something you've experienced before?
XNA, yes.
Yeah. So there was a lot of games in it, wasn't there, a few years ago?
At one time. I mean, back when, well, that was a thing that existed. Like, XNA doesn't really exist anymore. Like,
that's right, yeah.
At least in its XNA form. I think it morphed into something else, but, it's complicated. But, yeah, it's like, I knew people who worked in XNA until XNA stopped being a thing.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because it was a really good engine.
It was. It's what I actually started off doing Mr. Boom's Firework Factory in. And the plan originally was to release it in sometime in 2012 on XNA, on the Xbox Live Indie Games.
Right.
So paid my fee to get it listed on there. I'd started working towards all the things they expect you to do, like having safe areas and having all the stuff for people hot unplugging the controllers and hot swapping controllers and removing memory cards and having all the safe stuff for this. I'd just about finished it and I was about ready to make it live, only to get this announcement from Microsoft, hey, surprise everybody, we're not doing XNA anymore. It's now all Xbox One and Xbox Live Indie games on ID at Xbox. So if you kindly stop doing what you're doing, throw away all your source code and move to this instead, then we might review your game on there. So at that point, I thought, I can't do that. I'm not going along with this plan anymore. So that's where I started looking into Unreal Engine and other solutions to move it to something a bit more future-proof and a bit more portable.
So, what did you end up selecting?
I ended up choosing Unreal Engine. I took a look at Unity, I took a look at Monogame, and I took a look at Unreal Engine. The reason I looked at Monogame was it's supposed to be a spiritual successor to XNA.
Yeah,
but
that's
at
one.
the time it didn't have there's something called an asset pipeline in there, which lets you do the like convert automatically all of your graphics and sound assets and address them from like a central place and load them up in a cache. But that wasn't quite working properly with Visual Studio in Monogame at the time. So I discounted that one, just moved on to other things. I looked at Unity, and I thought that would be good because originally I'd written Firework Factory in C# and Unity's C#. But it turns out that Unity's version of C# is kind of different to .NET 4.5 or whatever XNA4 was using. And it would have basically been a total rewrite anyway. So I thought if I'm going to totally rewrite it, I might as well go with the language that I'm more comfortable with and have spent more time in, which is C++. So in the end, I chose Unreal Engine just for that reason.
Well, has it been? Do you think you made the right choice in terms of engine selection?
I think I did, yes. I'm sure there will be something to come and get me in the future, no doubt. I mean, there is the fact that by choosing Unreal Engine, you've got to, if your game is a success, you've got quite a large percentage of your profits to give to Epic each month. But I think for the amount of code that they give you and the feature set of the engine, it's certainly it's a worthwhile sacrifice to make, to be honest, because I couldn't have written all that code myself.
And I'm assuming that you're making your game solo here?
Yes, I am. There was originally I had a guy who produced all the music called Nick Proud, and he did all the music. And now he's moved into game development, the actual coding side of it himself. He's working on his own game, which I took a look at it on Twitter a few weeks ago, and it looks like a space simulator, like a spiritual homage to Star Trek and Bridge Commander and things like that. It was kind of interesting.
So it's a VR game?
No, it looks like a pixel art game, like a 2D pixel art game. And I originally had a guy when I was working on Firework Factory in 2D for XNA. A guy came on board called Michael Hussinger, and he did all of the 2D art. And he did a really fantastic job of all this 2D art for basically sprites hand painted. And when I moved to 3D, there wasn't much of that I could keep because it didn't look right in 3D. And I think that the main thing that I kept from that, though, that I really do love it, is the guy, the Mr. Boom character that you can see on the Steam page and in the game. That is directly Michael's drawings and his hand-drawn paint. And I'm glad that we've got that because I think he really does bring character to the game.
Was there I'm guessing you switched to 3D because of Unreal Engine.
Yes, I think you can do 2D in Unreal Engine, but it's not really what it's built for. And if you've got the capability there to produce really nice looking 3D with nice environments, why not just go for it?
There are reasons not to do that, but
yeah.
But yeah, it's like if you were sticking with the 2D stuff, then Unity would probably have been the engine of choice.
Yes.
Like, anyway, so we've talked quite a bit about the technicals of Mr. Boom's Fireworks Factory, but we haven't actually talked about what the game is yet. So, what is this game? What genre, and so on and so forth.
So it's a fast-paced action puzzle game. And you play the game as a new hire to a firework factory, and the boss, Mr. Boom, wants you to take the crates from machines that come out in a certain order and reorder them into a different order to put them into an exit so they can be dispatched. This would be easy apart from the fact the crates are constantly moving. The only control you have over where they go is by rotating junctions where the conveyor belts meet. And if they collide, they explode in rather violent ways, and the bits of crate and the bits of firework that go out in random directions are also destructive to the other crates. So if you don't have your wits about you, you can very quickly end up in a pretty big mess. And the idea of it is to start out simple, get people into it, but then ramp up the difficulty bit by bit until it becomes something where you really have to concentrate and plan ahead. A lot of the levels are solvable in such a way that if you know the solution, you know the solution. I'm working on at the moment different ways of solving the levels using power-ups. So there's some replay value there. Otherwise, you could just watch the videos for it on YouTube, and essentially that's it. If your reactions are quick enough to do the moves that you see in the video, that is.
Like, I'm assuming that's possible. Right. And how many like puzzle levels do you have in the game, or are planning to have in the game?
I'm planning to have at least 30 levels. At the moment, I have got 8 levels plus a tutorial. It takes me a couple of days to plan out and produce a level, and then another day to test it. So at the speed I'm going at, with the ideas I've already got written down, by the middle of May, I should have enough levels to start polishing up what we've got and get it out the door, basically. Because that's the only thing it needs at the moment is more levels and an end screen, and various existing bugs need to be fixed, which is why it's in closed beta. So every time I put out a new level, people can test that level and give opinions on it.
Like, makes sense, and sounds like your game is coming along at a pretty decent clip. How long has it been in development?
You'd be surprised, but since the first XNA version, that was in 2010. So there is a 10-year gap almost between now and when I first had the idea. However, I've not been working on the game constantly for that whole 9 years. There's been periods of downtime, moving on to other things. I can certainly blame Fallout 4 and Skyrim for taking up a huge chunk of a year where I didn't do any game development at all. I found these games and couldn't stop playing them for quite some time, actually. So that's a hallmark of a good game right there. There were times when I just moved on to other projects for a little while. I find that if I start to feel a bit burnt out, I move on to a different game or a different project, and I come back in a couple of months and I feel fine. This time I have to get it finished because I have set myself quite a tight deadline, and I've put out a release date in various places as July the 4th. There are various people saying, I can't wait to play this, I can't wait to buy this. So I'd be letting them down now if I didn't actually follow through and finish this. With a lot of game developers, including myself, the hard part of the project isn't creating the game, it's finishing the project. And I find that's a problem for me as well.
And do you think you'll hit the deadline?
Most certainly, yeah. It's not going to be a problem to hit the deadline. I think if I find that it gets to the end of May, start of June, and I'm still working on stuff, I might just have to cut some levels out, which means I might just have to lower the price from my expectation of what I wanted to charge people for it. I think that would only be fair. If there's less content, people don't expect to pay as much for a game.
It's a fair assessment.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
It's a fair assessment of the situation. Yeah. Like, and once again, how many levels do you have, like, plans, for the whole thing?
30.
30. So
they're all handmade.
Right.
I've looked at a lot of puzzle games. A lot of them seem to be puzzle platformers these days, and a lot of them use procedural generation for the levels, which means you can put out a game with 200-300 levels in it, but they all seem to look the same. And I can imagine that could get quite boring for the player. I don't normally play those kind of games myself. So I didn't want to go down that same path. If it didn't appeal to me, I thought perhaps it doesn't appeal to a lot of people to be playing a whole lot of repetitive, procedurally generated levels. So I wanted to give each level in my game character. By doing that, each level has unique set pieces on it. So you might see like a fuel tank or a large generator or a big tank of goop with pipes coming in and out of it that the crates move around. So something to catch the eye and make the level different, apart from just the fact that the junctions and conveyor belts and the crates are in different configuration.
Yeah. From what I've seen of the game, it reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever played or heard of this one, Rush.
No, I haven't seen that one.
There's a game on, like, I'm trying to think, was it Wii or WiiWare? Well, it's been ported to other platforms where you got these cubes on conveyors. Well, they weren't really conveyors, but it reminds me a lot of this game, just with a very bright color palette instead of, the dark and grungy set here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's not something I've heard of. I might have to look that one up. The only game I've so far, apart from that, anyone said it seems similar to. Back in the days of DOS, there was a game called The Lost Mind of Dr. Brain, and had one level called Train of Thought, which was basically this concept. But you had to move balls down train tracks and into various tunnels. And that's the only thing I've seen that I've been pointed to that's similar to it. I've always assumed that there's no such thing as an original idea. This is one of those ones where people struggle to find something that's similar to it, I think.
I'm like, you never know. I'm like, anyway, so about the pricing, what amount are you looking at currently?
I was aiming for somewhere in the region of $12 for the game. And as part of that, I would potentially be releasing new levels as updates to the game rather than as DLCs until I think it's got enough content. If it starts off and people aren't purchasing the game because they don't think it's got enough content, I will just keep adding content until we reach that sweet spot, basically.
Sounds like a good deal.
Yeah.
Now,
DLC path for an indie game, I'm not sure that's the right approach to take.
It's hard to say. It's one of those depends on the case by case thing. In your case, updates sound better. And do you have any plans to release an editor so people can create their own levels?
Actually, yes, I do, but that will be after release at some point. The way the levels are designed is in such a way that a level can be represented as a text file of about 20 lines of just raw text. So when you have made your level, you wouldn't need any special kind of hosting or anything to distribute the level. You could basically paste it onto Discord, excuse me, or put it on a no paste or a paste bin or whatever you wanted to do with it. It's just a text file. And then to import those levels, as well as being able to download them, you could potentially just paste them onto a file on your hard disk and they're ready to go. And they will be quite safe because they are just text. Because the definition of the level is just which crates come out from which machines, where the machines are, what order it expects them to be in, some various time limits, and where the conveyor belts are. And it can infer the rest from that, basically.
And in terms of platforms, is this game Windows only, or is it also on Mac and Linux?
It's Windows only at the moment. The only thing stopping me from also releasing on Mac and Linux is lack of hardware to test it. So I have a couple of Linux machines in my home. Neither of them have graphics cards. So that wouldn't be something I could test. And I don't own a Mac or know anybody with a Mac at the moment that would want to get involved. I'm not closing the door on the idea, though, because Unreal Engine supports porting across these platforms, and in theory, it should be pretty much trivial, apart from some of the effects would work slightly differently.
Yeah, such as the quirks of those platforms.
Yeah.
Any console ambitions still, or is this going to be a PC-only project?
I did originally have quite a few console ambitions. I've approached various people, so Idea to Xbox, for example.
Right.
The problem that I have when I approach these different providers and different publishers is that they will look at the game and they will go, this is a bit too niche for us. Basically, they don't want to take the risk, as I understand it, of putting something onto their console, providing the marketing support and everything else that comes along with it, if chances are it won't sell to their expectations, which, in all honesty, it's an indie game. It's my first properly commercially released game, and chances are that is what's going to happen. But if it's a flop, it's a flop. It's still released, and I'll still be proud of it.
Right, and I'm going to see if my colleagues have any questions for you at this point.
All my questions seem to have been answered, so I got
Yeah, it
nothing.
seems like we've covered things pretty well.
All right. I guess we'll end things by asking, beyond Firework Factory here, do you have any more plans for games in the near future?
I do, yes. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet. There is talk of a rather simple and rather silly game involving a pigeon at the seaside, at the coast, that steals people's food. But that is something that we've only fleshed out ideas on that one, and that might be something that makes a bit of an appearance, perhaps towards the end of this year.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep an eye out for it, if should that come to fruition. And indeed, we'll be keeping our eye on Mr. Boom's Fireworks Factory. How do people get into the beta?
There is on Steam a Discord link. If you follow the link from my website or from Steam, you'll find the Discord link. The Discord link will take you to the Discord for the game. If you drop me a message on there, my handle on there is Brain, and then just let me know that you want to be involved in the beta. I can give you a beta key, and then the only thing really that's expected is that you play the game and give some feedback. Feedback's always the most important thing to making the game stable, making it suit what people want, and making it fun, most importantly. So if anyone is interested, by all means, come along. There's still room for testers.
Okay, then. Right, so the game is Mr. Boom's Fireworks Factory, currently in open beta. It's being targeted for a July release date. It seems like it will make it. How much content there is the main concern. It's being targeted for $12, so be sure to pick it up when it gets released. All right, so that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our multiplayer session episode. Yeah, it's been busy. Anyway, until then, I wish you good gaming.
Thank you.